Why hello everyone, Spencer here, also known as LEGO Dude 11, and in today's video, this is a brand new TV show review for you out on the channel, and today is my official Season 1 House of the Dragon spoiler review, so without further ado, let's discuss. Alright, so I do have my list of notes here that I did take down on the full season. There are 10 episodes of this first season of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. This is a prequel to the Game of Thrones show, and I think there might be 10 episodes to each season. It is renewed for a second season. Don't know if it's coming out next year or when, and they want to do either three more or 3 total. I don't know what's happening. But before I get into this, I love this season. I mean, I'm just going to probably keep saying this throughout the review here. I thoroughly love this show. And a little bit of information before we get started as well, like a words English thing I wanted to mention. I've only watched the first episode of Game of Thrones. I haven't seen the full show, and I've heard the last season is a bit of a train wreck. So even if I were to watch it, I don't know if I would end just before the last season or watch the entire show, but I love this Game of Thrones show, or I love House of the Dragon, for what it is, and I'll mention things throughout this review as to why I mean just different topics, but you know I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones going into this, and that you know I knew what to expect going in, but I just didn't want to sit through all that time before this show started. So I might rewatch the entire show. I mean, I know some of the backstory, some of the lore and all that, so I just want to give that clarification to you. So going into this, we got the composer. I want to talk about the score, the composer for this work for this show. Ramin Djawadi. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. It's Djawadi. It has a little silent D on there. Ramin Djawadi, who actually has done 2 Marvel compositions. He did the first ever Marvel movie, Iron Man, well, MCU movie, Iron Man, and then he recently did the Eternals soundtrack, which I thought was really nice, and I quite like the Eternals theme, and what he did with the Eternals theme, even though the movie was kind of a bit jumbled. I did like that theme. And this score, the classic Game of Thrones theme, like people were like, what's this show gonna have? Is it gonna have the classic theme? And it does. And it's awesome every time you put it on, and just the motifs you get when you're watching the show are epic. They're good. I like this composer. Now, I'm not gonna say he's one that I constantly listen to, but in this show, and especially like the Eternals stuff, the Eternals theme, it is definitely something worth listening to, but I mean, he's not one that I constantly like listen to, like as I said, actively listen to. Like, oh yeah, Ramin Djawadi, this guy's a legend. His works are great, but I just think in this scope, like in this fantasy realm, I think that's one of the reasons why Eternals works so well for him, is because it's like this grand fantasy-esque world, but this, you know, which is like Game of Thrones and Westeros. So I really personally like him, like what he's done with those 2 works. So there's that little story for you. Going on, you know, before the show came out, like, what are my thoughts on this? What was I thinking? Because, you know, I as I said, I never really watched the Game of Thrones show, and then I watched the first episode, and kind of like my background, I kind of already explained that, but like I was pumped for the show, and then the trailer came out, and I'm like, this looks like it could be really good. And you know, coming out of the summertime is like Marvel shows, like there's nothing, we had Stranger Things, and this year has been like a really, I guess, didn't we have Squid Game? That was 2021. So, you know, shows have kind of been like hit and miss this year. And then we have 2 fantasy shows on at the same time, along with the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, which I only checked out the first 2 episodes. I didn't bother to continue it. That's probably another story for another time. But also we have She-Hulk. We had She-Hulk going on already. I made a review of that. If you want to watch that, click the card up there. But I like She-Hulk more than most people. And then we have Andor going on currently as well, as of this video, still going on. And this House of the Dragon and Andor are probably the two best series going on in 2022. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, I'm sure that you like that as well, but I had to stop. And however, this just got me all excited. The trailer got me all excited, and I was hyped for it. Even though I haven't seen all of Game of Thrones, I probably still would love Game of Thrones as much as I like this show. So that's just, I was very excited because we got a new Game of Thrones show, and I'll let you a little bit about why I like it so much. So the start of this show and the story is just amazing. Now, I followed along with what was going on, but again, I probably would know more if I had seen the show. But again, I want to mention something specific here that is really interesting, or that I've loved throughout all the weeks that his show has been airing. This show is a prequel, right? So if you're not familiar with any of the characters like I am of Game of Thrones, like I watched the first episode and I know who like some of the characters are, like Jon Snow and the Lannister and all that stuff. But people who have seen House of the Dragon are following along and know what's going on because it's a prequel. They're not confused. They like me, I might be asking, oh, what's the red wedding scene? Like, how does this compare to this and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not totally confused of what's going on because it's introducing new characters, a new story, things you can follow along with. So I really appreciate that. The start of this show, the premiere episode just kicks off on an absolute banger episode. It just throws you in, it just takes you back into the world of Westeros and introduces you to a new set of characters very nicely, and ends on a great action scene of jousting with Matt Smith, and I'm going to get to the characters later here, but in the story, it just goes along, like I wrote down the story of all 10 episodes is drawn out, and it's drawn out throughout all 10 episodes very nicely. Thematically, it works. And like I wrote down my last notes here, the finale, I'll get to that later. But all of them connect very nicely, and you understand what's going on. With Lord of the Rings, and I want to compare, I just want to compare this based off of a fantasy level and out of a story level. But I feel like this one takes the story and continues it in a very nice fashion. Like each episode, this is the perfect way to describe this. Each episode feels like it has closure, and it's a chapter leading up into that, like, okay, this episode ends, okay, what's going to happen next? And now, I haven't seen all of Lord of the Rings of Power, but I feel like in that show, it's drawn out way too much. And that's not really my taste. Now, and that's fine, all art is subjective, but this is what I prefer, and this everything they did at this show, the writing, the development, the characters, like, it all sunk in nicely. I really appreciate that. So, with that said, nice segue there into the characters themselves. We have, I think, the standouts here. Obviously, the main character, Rhaenyra, but I want to get to her a little bit later. But I want to focus on Matt Smith and the father, the king, who actually, as this is a spoiler review, if you don't want to be spoiled that much, back out and then come back and save this to your favorites list, where I will be, because I will be spoiling things, so be sure to watch the show. But the king, more specifically, because he dies, he has to win an Emmy for this role in particular. As he ages, this show does various time jumps, which I kind of will be just talking about later. But I love the king, how he just is able to act in these different ways, in various ways and positions of his life. And it's interesting seeing him interact with Matt Smith, and I find it funny how Matt Smith is like the only character that doesn't age. He ages a little bit, I think, throughout the last episode. Like, you can tell he's older, but it's just funny, like, they don't get a different actor for him. But my camera cut, and I don't know what I was talking. I know I was talking about the characters. I don't know what I was just talking about. I apologize. I know I was talking about the king. So yeah, I love the way he plays the king, King Viserys. And then we have Matt Smith, who is just absolute standout. I was talking about Matt Smith that doesn't age, and Matt Smith is an absolute standout whenever he's on screen. We have Rhaenyra. We have these kids, right? these kid actors for Rhaenyra, Alicent, I believe those two, and then they age up, and then we have their own kids, right? We have this uncle, we have the nephews, and we have all these children actors who people thought, oh, these child actors are not going to be that good, but everybody gets a motive. Everybody has time to shine, which I love. And the guy who has the uncle that has the eye patch is by far, I mean, he is amazing. He has amazing character dynamic with the guy with the eye cut out. That whole scene was brutal. There's intense scenes in the show that I absolutely love, but they do it in a way that's not just like, oh, action, action, action. It's drawn out and it flows nicely for the scenes. Like they have intense scenes. There's drama, but the drama and the scenes that are like when you're walking, or like if there's like a horse, it's not too long. It's not like Lord of the Rings where it's too long, and I love it. But all these characters get motives, and I love it. I absolutely love it. The guy with the eye patch also just looks identical to Matt Smith, like a young 20-year-old version of Matt Smith, or however old Matt Smith is, just younger, like 10 years younger than Matt Smith is, and I find it funny. There's also one of the most brutal scenes in this show. Oh yeah, so okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep that for a little bit later here, but like I said, the kids' storylines are great. They don't feel like they're too kiddish, but when they're adapted to the to the story of the Game of Thrones. Like they're actually all playing the Game of Thrones, because Alicent, when Rhaenyra has her children, or is dealing with the death of the father, and then going to Dragonstone with Matt Damon. I'm kidding, that's not his name. Matt Smith, or Damon. I call him Matt Damon. It's funny. When they go to Dragonstone, Alicent has to deal with her own kids in all of these situations. So they're all playing the Game of Thrones, and it really tugs at your heartstrings when you think about it. Like how are they going to deal with this, the whole impact of the situation? But the kids' storylines, they work. I like it a bunch, and I feel like in any show or movie, it's like, oh, they have a child actor that can be cringy, they can just be sidelined, but they aren't. They are actually important in this show. And so like I said, they have these child actors in the first 2 episodes. I believe it's the first 2 episodes. It might be the first 3 or so. And then they time jump like years with Alicent and Rhaenyra, and then they're older. They're much older. They're adults. Like in this poster that you see on the thumbnail of this video, they're younger, and then they get older. You can look it up. You can Google it, or if you've seen the show, you guys know what I'm talking about. But I did not mind the time jumps. I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get the little girl again. Like, she's a good actress who played Rhaenyra, but I didn't mind the new actors. They're really good in the roles, and they portrayed the character very nicely. Like they nailed the casting on that for getting the new actors that they aged up. So I love that tremendously. And the time jumps for the show, like I don't know if I haven't really heard people say anything on this about like, oh, the time jumps made the show bad, or like, oh, it didn't work. Like, I was so focused in this one timeline, like it should have been like focused on like a 3-day, like it didn't feel like it was jarring. It felt like it worked because it was, I don't know how to really describe it, because it felt like the story, it worked in a story narrative. It wasn't just like, okay, now randomly a year later, or now 5 years later, it's like, no. It works in a story context. It wasn't just like a random, like Endgame 5 years later type deal. It worked for the narrative purpose of this story, which I really found quite interesting. And so yeah, the new actors didn't bother me. It worked in the story. And the most excruciating stuff, I think, in this show to watch, well, okay, I have one thing, and it's not really excruciating, but the one most brutal and intense scene, which I'll get to in just a second, but I think the most excruciating stuff in this show was the birth, or any birth scenes. Because in the first episode, you have the wife of King Viserys, who is, having her the newborn child who is going to be the king of Westeros, and because they keep mentioning that throughout the show, like, okay, the new king is going to take over because our king or our king Viserys, right, is going to hand off the mantle, or I guess the crown, to the new heir of Westeros, and who, sadly, the wife has to give birth. When the wife is giving birth, that's very excruciating, very painful, right? And in the midst of the scene, it's also taking place at the same time of the jousting that Matt Smith is at. So she's gonna die. So they have to cut the baby out of her, or cut the baby out of her. They have to cut her open so they get the baby out, and it's like it's one of the most intense scenes. Just right off the bat in the first episode, they do this, and it's like, ah. But yeah, when you see, like, I don't think we ever saw Alicent having a child. Or we might have when King Viserys and her were together. But yeah, it was intense to see Rhaenyra having a baby as well. The two things I do want to mention, that the guy who was looking at her feet, Alicent's feet, was absolutely one of the most evil dudes in the show. And you'll know what I mean context-wise, what I mean by that, looking at her feet. He has a foot fetish. But yeah, and in the first couple episodes, before the time jumped, King Viserys, they're like, you should marry this 12-year-old girl. And he's like, what? I don't want to marry a 12-year-old girl. And I found that funny. I'm like, wait, this is disgusting. Don't marry a 12-year-old girl. And then he says, I want to marry Alicent Hightower. Otto Hightower. And Otto Hightower is actually the Lizard, who's Rhys Ifans from The Amazing Spider-Man and No Way Home. He's played the Lizard, so he's in this show. I like his acting as well. And then in the one episode, the whole episode was about Rhaenyra and Matt Smith's character, Daemon, getting together. They wanted to make out together, and it was incredibly weird. And then, in the end of the show, they get married, and they're off in Dragonstone. So, a very unique storylines going on with them, and then, the whole thing with King Viserys in the beginning with the 12-year-old girl, and then him marrying Alicent. So, all these storylines are very unique, very interesting, but they keep you engaged, and they all play part in the Game of Thrones, and I like it. So, yeah, so the birthing scenes were so intense, and then we get the most probably brutal scene I've ever seen in this show, in any show I've seen. Now, I haven't watched all of Game of Thrones, but I'm pretty sure, I don't know, this is just me spitballing here, but this is the most, it caught me off guard. I'm like, whoa, scene in Game of Thrones ever, which was when Daemon, also Matt Smith's character, just cuts the head right off the husband of Rhaenyra. And I'm like, whoa! Oh, it leaves off, it cuts, right here, and it leaves his tongue hanging out. I'm like, oh my god, that is so brutal. It caught me off guard, because I know that there's a character that might die, but I'm going, whoa, I did not expect that right there. Because he's yelling at King Viserys. When King Viserys, they opens the door, and he's super old, and he has that mask on, and he's just walking with his cane, and then all of a sudden you see him sit on the Game of Thrones, when you see him sit on the sword throne, and then all of a sudden, he's like, the husband is saying, our children are, I'm not going to use the word, our children are not good children, right? And your wife has made out with multiple people, right? Multiple men. And he got sick of that. He got tired of that real fast. And, well, he started to get mad. He's like, off with his head. And then Daemon just did it for him. Just took him out. He's like, you can keep his tongue. Or, no, King Viserys said, cut off his tongue. And then Daemon just cut off his head. Said he can keep his tongue. That was a great and intense scene right there. But yeah, I could talk about this show forever, so I'm going to get to my last two notes here that kind of parallel each other. And, yeah, I feel like I've been talking about all I want to kind of say, in a collection here. So I'm just gonna get off to my last final note here, and yeah. So we have the last 2 episodes that parallel each other, and what I mean by this, before I get to this, before I continue talking about this, what I love that this show did is each episode, lots of shows will have like coming up next on, or like a previously on segments, which this show does that. But what I love about this show in particular, because Rick and Morty also does this, but this one does a inside the episode look. Like normally Disney Plus shows don't ever really do that. But this show, well, because, on Disney Plus, they have those Marvel assembled things that they say behind the scenes. But this actually just takes it inside the episode, during the episode. Like, there's no behind the scenes segment, like separate content. It's just within the episode. At the end, it's just English talking too fast. Inside the episode, within the episode at the end. So I like that. But beyond that, after the finale, they talk about how the 9th episode, the penultimate episode, and the finale are parallels of how, when I forgot to mention this, Aegon, the king, or Aegon, the son of Alicent, becomes the new king of Westeros. That's how episode 9 ends. The dealing with who's going to be king, who's going to be heir, taken off from King Viserys. So that's who becomes the heir. And then we leave that episode and the finale, which I'm going to discuss in a moment here, deals with Rhaenyra's story. So episode 9 is Alicent's story, how they're dealing with over there, and then on Westeros, and then in Dragonstone, how Alicent is dealing over there on that side with Daemon and all that, with their family, that side. So I really like that a lot. How they kind of used those 2 stories, because they could have done anything. They just could have continued the story within one, like all the characters. But no, they did it in a really unique and beautiful way. I feel like it's beautiful. Art is subjective. People can think about it and say whatever they have, their own opinions in any way. But I like that point. I like that detail with what they did with those 2 episodes specifically in the show, because like the first few episodes have the child actors kind of give you a nice story introduction with the characters, and then they do the time jump a little bit and then have that middle chunk section, and then you get no king anymore, and then you have these kids that take over, and then the last 2 episodes parallel each other. I like that a lot. I really like with what they did with that. Well done, nice job. So I'm going to get to my final note here, and then we're going to conclude this video. So my last final note here that I took down about this season of the show, not about the entire show, but about the season specifically, is the finale and the future for season 2 and what's to come. But, because I talked about how the penultimate and finale episodes are parallel. But more specifically, the finale, again, I'm praising the show. I did not expect this show to be as good as it was. I do think that this show should win a bunch of Emmys, for sure. King Viserys, definitely, actors awards, whatever. And, there was not a weak episode at all. I don't think there was a weak episode. If anybody, I haven't heard anybody really discuss this, but which episode was the best, which one was the weakest. I mean, all of them knocked it out of the park in my book, and the finale is no exception. I mean, I just, each episode had a little bit of action. It wasn't like, boom, action, 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 which I think is fine for this show. And I feel like it'll pick up, again, in season 2, I feel like it'll have a little bit more of that in season 2 and season 3, depending on, how far they go. There is, I believe, going to be a season 2, so depending on how much action there is. And there doesn't even need to be that much. It's just, with what season 1 had was totally fine. But the finale was definitely ended on a really heavy note. When, like I just said, how episode 9 was Alicent's story, and then episode 10 is Rhaenyra's story. When Matt Smith, Daemon, is talking with Rhaenyra and okay, what's our plan gonna be? Or I guess before that, when she's pregnant, again for her with her sixth child. She's trying to deal. She's having that baby, and then it dies, which I guess in the books is what happened. And that happens. They're having a funeral, or they're mourning over that, and then Daemon and Rhaenyra are trying to figure out what's our plan. How are we going to take over the war of Westeros, and how are we going to defeat them? Because the grandmother of Rhaenyra comes, and she warns them that Aegon is now crowned heir of the throne of Westeros. So they're trying to figure out what's their plan for war, or do they need to go to war? Like they're contemplating that, and then in the midst of this, the son, I forget his name, Jacaerys, I believe it is, because the younger one of Daemon and Rhaenyra goes to Westeros and then talks to the guy with the eye patch, or talks to the guy on the throne, not the Iron Throne, but another castle, and then the guy with the eye patch is there. I forget his name. They have like all these similar names, and and he's like, you gotta, to the younger one, Jacaerys, he says, you gotta cut out your eye, just like I did, as my prize, as a prize for me. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. So he tries to leave, but he whips out his sword, and they both about to duel each other, and the guy's like, get out of here. The guy on the throne's like, get out of here. So he leaves, and you automatically, when he's on his dragon. By the way, the dragons in this show look incredible. I forgot to mention that the dragons in this show look incredible. The detail on the dragons are incredible when they're up close and everything. Oh, it's amazing. I love the shots they got for the dragons. I mean, like up close, like it doesn't just look like CGI. It looks real. It looks real, and the texture is amazing. But when he's flying out of the castle away from them, you see the guy at the eye patch just on the ginormous dragon, and trying to scare the kid Jacaerys, and so he flies away. They're flying in the rain, and he gets away out of the cloud, or out of the rain, and then you just see the big dragon come up and take him down, and it's like, oh man, so he's gone. They lost a child. Rhaenyra and Daemon lost a child. So another one bites the dust, and guy with the eye patch is like screwed again. So that's how it ends, and then you just see Rhaenyra turn around, make this evil stare, like we're going to war, and that's how the season ends. And I thought it was epic, guys. I mean, this show, I'm not one, or I'm always, when I watch TV or even a movie, like I have to be one like where I understand what's going on, and also it can't be too slow. Like Lord of the Rings, like when I was one, like, oh, really, we're getting this? And I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm not saying I don't like Lord of the Rings, I'm not saying it's a bad franchise, that's not what I'm trying to say at all, but this show does it really nicely, and if you're not into this type of thing, that's fine. But let me know if you've seen the show down in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this first season of House of the Dragon, because I definitely like this show. I mean, I like these shows that are, I mean, it's a fantasy show, and I like shows that can take its time, but knows what it's doing. Like, if it's just there, like Lord of the Rings, like Rings of Power, to have a scene, and you're talking to someone, it's like, oh, I love you, oh, and you stand there for like a minute, it's like, okay, let's pick up the pace a little bit here. Like, you can have a scene that's drawn out, but do it a little bit quicker, which is, this show. But, I don't know, that's just me. Let me know how you felt, if you liked or disliked the show, the Season 1 of House of the Dragon. Let me know in the comments below, and are you excited for Season 2? I certainly am. Cannot wait. If it's next year or a couple years, I don't know. Hope it comes sooner rather than later, but what time will tell. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe to the LEGO Dude 11 family. You can subscribe down there as well. And turn the bell notification on to keep up to date on all the current reviews, vlogs, and whatever content I have coming on here on the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Follow me over at Boba Fett Jedi Master. The link's down below as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me. And as always, don't forget to keep calm, play LEGO. Peace out. See you guys next video. Bye, everyone.